It is so rare for someone inside the media to call out the media, at least in an accurate way. But it happened the other day when Rachel Maddow pointed out how the media is falling for a trick by the Trump campaign all over again.
Anybody who thinks the Springfield, Ohio lies about Haitian migrants is going poorly for Trump should consider the context in which he has not just brought this up, but he and his running mate have repeatedly insisted that this is what we ought to be talking about.
So many people in the media don't get this. Allegedly negative press attention that a campaign wants isn't actually negative press attention. Coming up, I'll tell you about another presidential campaign that said after the election it purposely did this, and it was the key to winning. The media's gullibility is a tool that people use all the time, and the Trump campaign knows how to do it. They're pulling the media's strings. But they're not the only ones. The media's gullibility will be put to the test well before Election Day, almost a month earlier, on October 7th. That should be the day the media finally takes a break from its anti-Israel narratives and marks the one-year anniversary of the most horrific terrorist attack of modern times, when the Islamist terrorists of Hamas invaded Israel and slaughtered 1,200 people of all ages and carried out unimaginably evil crimes and kidnapped hundreds. The things that happened that day aren't even represented in horror movies. That's how evil this stuff is. It was also that day when radicalized people, especially on the far left in America, including professors on college campuses, rushed to praise and celebrate those attacks. There is right now a strategy underway by organized groups that support the goal of building a new Islamist empire. They're working to swamp the media on October 7th with anti-Israel protests filled with lies. Ahead, I'll explain the journalistic principles that should determine where the media puts its focus that day. Plus, questions from listeners. All that and more coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. If you've been listening, you might know this, but if you're new, here's the quick rundown. I spent 20 years inside the mainstream media, 10 on NPR and then 10 on CNN, where I became fact-checker on air and online. And throughout all those years, I saw the systemic problems that prevent the media from doing its job for all of us, which is supposed to be always providing only truth. This podcast is all about the systemic problems and how to fix them. I also have a newsletter. You can find it at my website, joshlevs.com, JOSHLEVS.com, and there's a link in your show notes. The newsletter is free, but one great way to support this show is to become a paid subscriber. If you do that, you get exclusive content, including a piece on how to get full access, no paywalls, to tons of news sites, tons of newspapers, just about all newspapers, actually. I explain that to my paid subscribers. It's a completely legal way that you can get from me. This is episode 25. It's so great to have you along for this journey. I keep hearing from so many of you, and I appreciate the support. You're the reason we can keep going. Let's jump right into this. Last week, I explained that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are trying to do anything they can to create a scandal around Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Meanwhile, Trump does scandalous things constantly. Recently, Rachel Maddow did a roundup of just a few of the latest things from Trump and his team, some of which you probably have not even heard about, and that is going to be really significant here. She started with how he recently disparaged Medal of Honor recipients, of course, and then this.
His campaign staff physically shoved an employee at Arlington National Cemetery when she tried to stop Trump and his team from filming political campaign videos at Arlington, which you are not allowed to do for all the obvious reasons, not just because it's the rules, but because it's obviously the only decent thing to do.
Then J.D. Vance did public events with Tucker Carlson, even though Tucker had done a gushing 2-hour event with a Holocaust denier. Then came Trump's disastrous debate, with polls afterwards showing overwhelming majorities of Americans saw that Kamala obviously did much better. Polls show that she even gained ground on the areas that previously Trump was leading on, like the economy. Meanwhile, he went off on another one of his insane, rambling diatribes that I had not even heard about.
He told a campaign rally that the state of California has a giant faucet with a handle that he said is the size of a building. It's such a big faucet with such a big handle that it takes a whole day to turn the faucet on or off. And he said that faucet, which he has invented, that is how California dumps all of Canada's water into the sea. And when he's president, that faucet won't turn the water into the sea anymore. What are you talking about?
I had not heard this, but it's true. He did.
And they have essentially a very large faucet. And you turn the faucet, and it takes one day to turn it. It's massive. It's as big as the wall of that building right there behind you. And you turn that, and all of that water goes aimlessly into the Pacific. And if they turned it back, all of that water would come right down here and right into Los Angeles. They wouldn't have to have people not use more than 30 gallons and 32 gallons. They want to do that, they're trying to do that. And you have so much water.
This is tragicomically hilarious. This is the most emperor has no clothes situation I've ever seen in real life. The way that people still listen to him as though he has any clue what he's talking about. But the comic relief dissipates quickly because of other things he's been doing, like bringing a 9/11 conspiracy theorist to the 9/11 commemoration in New York. She made racist remarks about Kamala being of Indian descent. And by the way, if you don't think J.D. Vance can get even more pathetic, having already reversed all of his own beliefs in order to board the Trump train, after these racist remarks, he said there was nothing wrong with them, even though his own wife is of Indian descent. Meanwhile, it came out that Trump's golf club hosted an anti-Semitic troll who was convicted and spent 3 years in prison for his role on January 6th. Here is part of what NPR reported about him.
He allegedly told coworkers Hitler should have finished the job, and he once went to work with a Hitler mustache. He posted a video online where he blamed the spread of COVID-19 on Jewish people.
He had also put out a video saying babies with any deformities or disabilities should be shot in the forehead. Still, he was invited to give speeches at Trump's property. And at the same time, a pro-Trump, openly anti-Semitic ad is now airing in Michigan in an attempt to appeal to Muslim voters by going after Kamala's husband, Doug Emhoff, for being Jewish. I am pointing all this out because there is a good chance that you did not hear about at least some of these. And why is that? Well, because the news has been fixating on a different horrible action. People in Springfield, Ohio are in danger. The city has had to shut down schools. There are bomb threats and evacuations. Why? Because morons believe Trump and Vance when they say that this town is overrun with immigrants who are eating people's pets and geese. I discussed this in the episode after the debate, which I called The Media's Low Bar. You can learn more there. That was in episode 23. But here is what Rachel Maddow pointed out. This is what the Trump team wants.
I mean, if you're taking like a midterm exam or a final exam, you have no clue what any of the answers are, and you're definitely going to fail that test, why not get up and pull the fire alarm? I mean, yeah, you might get in some kind of trouble for pulling the fire alarm, but you failing is no longer going to be the story. It's made to order outrage. And the press was supposed to learn something about dealing with this in 2016, 2015. This is a tactic. We were supposed to get better at not having our chains yanked.
It's true. What the Trump team wants is for immigration to be the story, nothing else. Not women's rights over their own bodies, not the fight for democracy, not the fact that Trump loves dictators and wants to be one and is the ultimate useful idiot for bad actors here and at home. No, they want this to be the topic, and they're getting it. But it's not just 2015 and 2016 that should have woken the media up to how manipulable they are. They should have known this long before. Let me take you further back to an election 12 years earlier. The race was between John Kerry and George W. Bush, who was seeking a second term. The Bush team put out ads that used 9/11 imagery and invoked the September 11th terrorist attacks. Those ads became controversial because he was politicizing the horror of what had happened. The news talked about this nonstop. A New York Times headline said, "Bush campaigns amid a furor over ads." Newsweek's headline called it a shocking stumble. But after Bush won, a book was published that told the truth about what really happened. Behind the scenes, when they saw those kinds of headlines, the Bush team was, quote, ecstatic. At a strategy meeting, they specifically discussed how they could fan the flames. Here's a quote from the book. "Controversy sells," they said. It meant lots of free media. The ads were shown over and over again on news shows, particularly on cable TV. The visual of the rubble at the World Trade Center was a powerful reminder of the nation's darkest hour and Bush's finest. The book then pointed out that those ads eclipsed grim economic news at that point in the campaign. The book was called Election 2004, How Bush Won and What You Can Expect in the Future. You'd think maybe those words, what you can expect in the future, might have helped the media understand this. The campaign's tactic is to fan the flames of controversy in order to control which story takes the lead. By the way, Mark McKinnon, who was communications strategist in the Bush campaign, spoke about this after the 2004 election. He discussed how crucial this kind of manipulation is in politics.
The paid media component of the campaign is actually a minor speck in the waterfall of what happens in a presidential campaign. The free media and the press coverage of campaigns is really what drives presidential campaigns. And in fact, when we do our advertising, a lot of thought is given to actually how the press covers the advertising as opposed to the actual advertising that people see itself. There were certain controversies that happened with some of the ads over the course of the campaign. Those controversies brought a lot of attention to some ads that might not have otherwise gotten attention. And so there's actually some of our thinking that goes into that.
This helps explain why the Trump team might love the fact that J.D. Vance is getting criticized for something that many of you contacted me about. It was when he said this during an interview with CNN.
If I have to,
But it wasn't just a meme,
create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana.
He went on to insist that by create stories, he meant create media attention. This system, in which candidates choose their own controversies, can happen at any time. And there's a new one now involving something vile that Trump said the other day about Jewish voters. Some people are trying to justify it by saying, well, look at the context. They have it exactly wrong. The context shows why it's so dangerous. That's coming up. But first, will the media let another danger to democracy, the pro-Hamas mobs, eclipse what it should be covering this coming October 7th? Support for They Stand Corrected comes from MIT45, which is part of a quickly growing market for products that include kratom. MIT45 wants to make sure people don't overuse it or use it in any other dangerous ways. They're leading the way with labeling and warnings, and they want federal regulators to regulate the industry. And this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Don't put any substances into your body based on anything you hear me say. Talk to your healthcare providers. Recently, a listener told me about a news story from a college campus. In this case, it was Emory University. The school's chapter of a group called Students for Justice in Palestine that is planning an anti-Israel event on October 7th, of course. That is just one dot in a sea of activity that groups like it are planning all over the country. On the one-year anniversary of the most horrific terrorist attack of modern times, they want to drown that out of the news. They, yet again, want to be the story. What the news should do that day is talk about what actually happened on October 7th, which to this day, many Americans still don't know. The horrific things Islamist terrorists from Hamas, a proxy of Iran, did. Each year on September 11th, there's all this coverage of the commemoration ceremonies, as there should be. Well, per capita, October 7th was exponentially worse. Now you could say, well, September 11th happened to America. This is US-based media. Okay, let's look at what happened to the US citizens who were among those slaughtered. and among the hostages. Will that get attention? Part of what makes the media so gullible is its attraction to spectacles. You know who had a good segment about this? Bill Maher, last spring when campuses were letting out for the year.
There are 15.2 million college students in the U.S., and 2,300 have been arrested. That's 1/67th of 1%. And half of the ones in New York weren't even students. But we were given the false impression that these protesters are the voice of their generation, having found a cause for which they were willing to go to the tents and to the barricades.
He talked about this on his show Real Time.
When these kids chant, the whole world is watching, they're right. But only because you assholes with the cameras won't show anything else. Isn't there a bear in a swimming pool somewhere you should be covering?
To be clear, the violence and hatred of these people who call themselves protesters, that should be exposed. It should get coverage. And the number of people arrested does not cover all the people in the protests. But the media did spend way too much time giving these protesters the chance to be the central focus of the reporting instead of young people who were dealing with the fallout. A new report shows how bad it got. It's from the ADL, and they found at least 28 assaults, more than 200 cases of vandalism, 360 cases of harassment. What this boils down to is a lot of individual stories like this.
The FBI is investigating after 2 Jewish students were attacked on Pitt's campus late last night. Police say the attacker used a glass bottle to hit them in what's believed to be a targeted attack.
That is a recent report from CBS Pittsburgh. Here's another one from CBS Detroit about a recent attack at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
This is the intersection where police say a 19-year-old was attacked over the weekend after a group of men asked if he was Jewish. Now, he is said to have suffered minor injuries and is doing okay. At this time, police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
Details on those, exactly what happened, they're still being investigated. But we know that attacks have been happening and do keep happening. And it's not just physical attacks, it's also disruptions and vandalizing religious sites.
Jewish students are always told to leave, to avoid, to walk around, instead of holding those who they always admit are violating university policies accountable.
That's Luda Izahorov. She was the student body president at the University of Oregon and is now interning with the ADL, which held a video conference about this issue the other day. Luda said even at her school, in which she had open communication with school officials and police, they still didn't act on the mass of people violating the rules and shouting hateful things, including support for Palestinian terrorists.
Rhetoric almost always leads to consequences, and Jewish students are the ones to deal with the brunt of those consequences.
Some people in the media try to write all this off by giving you the impression that a large percentage of Jewish students are actually taking part in the protests. That's tokenism, people emphasizing that they are Jewish so the media will play that up. Here is a clip from PBS Frontline about groups behind some of these protests.
One of the groups was Students for Justice in Palestine. The other, Jewish Voice for Peace, a progressive Jewish group critical of Israel.
JVP, the group you just heard mentioned, they push lies. It blamed Israel for the terrorism inflicted on Israel. Leading JVP activists openly support Hamas terrorists and what they did on October 7th. All this gets left out. Here's Anand Giridharadas speaking on Morning Joe on MSNBC.
A lot of those protesters are Jewish. There were Passover Seders held by Jewish protesters in that encampment. Like, this is not a collection of anti-Semitic activists.
And it literally is, by definition. And those Seders were performative. The news should show the big picture, and there are a lot of surveys that offer this. I've explained before, it's not helpful to toss lots of numbers out in broadcasting, which includes podcasting, but I will make figures available in the newsletter, and here are just a few of the highlights from a bunch of different surveys. The vast majority of Jewish people all over the country understand that what Hamas did on October 7th was, of course, unacceptable. There's only 3% who don't see that. Majorities of all ages say the way Israel has been carrying out its response is acceptable. More young people oppose Israel's actions than older people, but a lot of young people have no clue what the facts are. This is something I've been reporting since early on. One of the earliest surveys after October 7th found that the majority of young people in America thought that Israel has controlled the government of Gaza this whole time. They literally don't know what they're discussing. Meanwhile, a majority of Jewish students say they feel less safe amid these protests. And that's because they are less safe. It's not just a feeling. A quarter of them say they have faced physical or verbal assault. Here's maybe the biggest way to clearly understand how little attention this has gotten. I'm going to pull out of this issue for a second and jump back over to politics. Polls show that 1 in 4 Black men under age 50 say they're planning to vote for Trump. Think back to all the news coverage you've been taking in about this race. How often have you heard or seen people in that demographic at all? Have you seen any? The percentage of young Black men who plan to vote for Trump is way, way, way bigger than the percentage of Jewish people who have taken part in these protests. But which is getting more attention? Why is that? Well, part of it is that Jewish anti-Israel protesters meet a desired narrative of big media outlets, as I've discussed. But there's also something else more simple here, gullibility, right? It's much easier to send a crew or reporters to a big event where there's all this stuff happening. You get pictures, you get video, you get sound. Everyone you want to talk to is standing right there. It's a lot more work to reach out to people dealing with the fallout from all that. News agencies have done some stories like this. So it's not about zero here, but it's about the coverage being non-representative because there are so many more people who fit into that category. And that brings us back to the October 7th commemorations coming up. These groups are planning these big anti-Israel protests because they know that the media will fall for it and give them the attention they seek, unless we do something to make sure that doesn't happen. That is coming up. I support your work because I support your mission of accurate and impartial journalism as a pillar of a healthy American democracy. I am now a paid subscriber because Josh Lebs is so informative and I want to support fact-based journalism. Thanks, Josh. Those are just a couple of the recent messages from people who became paid subscribers to the newsletter for this show. Those of you doing so are so important. You help this show exist. And I know that some of you don't do email newsletters. That's okay. So you can contribute any amount to this show. This is the 25th episode, so maybe you decide you want to give $25. Maybe each episode has been worth $1 in your week. Anyone who tosses in at least $18 gets a bumper sticker and a QR code sticker. Just check out the link in the show notes. We're back. This is They Stand Corrected. I'm Josh Lebs. Recently, remarks Trump made about Jewish voters got a lot of news attention. He said that if he loses, the Jewish people should get a lot of the blame.
I'm not going to call this as a prediction, but in my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with a loss. If I'm at 40%, if I'm at 4%, think of it, that means 60% are voting for Kamala, who in particular is a bad Democrat. The Democrats are bad to Israel, very bad.
He made similar remarks at another event that same day. Lots of people rightfully called him out on this. The American Jewish Committee, which is nonpartisan, said this, quote, "Whoever a majority of the Jewish community votes for, Jews, roughly 2% of the U.S. population, cannot and should not be blamed for the outcome of the election. Setting up anyone to say we lost because of the Jews is outrageous and dangerous. Thousands of years of history have shown that scapegoating Jews can lead to anti-Semitic hate and violence." The AJC is right, but some people immediately insisted that in context, Trump's claim was somehow fine, that what he was really saying was that he's so great for Israel and that Jewish people should support him for that. No. The context for what Trump said goes way beyond just one set of remarks. The context is that Trump has violent supporters who go after whichever groups he cites as his latest enemy, whether it's election workers or the media. When Trump says, blame this group, that group faces new threats every time. That's the context. Also, people defending Trump would flip out if Kamala Harris blamed her potential loss on any demographic. But the context is even bigger than this. Trump has the support of proud anti-Semites. Remember, he did say there were very fine people among the Nazis in Charlottesville. And yes, he said that. And no, it was not any better in context. There is no context that makes it okay to say that. Also, remember what I mentioned earlier about Holocaust denial and openly anti-Semitic people being welcomed by the GOP under Trump's leadership. Trump is adoring to openly anti-Semitic right-wingers. Think of this guy, Nick Fuentes, or Kanye West, too. If you are a vicious anti-Semite and you love him, he's perfectly fine with you. Meanwhile, statistically, the Democratic Party remains overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. In fact, Kamala Harris does not have the support of a group that considers itself pro-Palestinian, specifically because she openly supports Israel's right to defend itself. As I've said on this show before, the big lie of the right and the big lie of the left are both steeped in anti-Semitism. For the right, it's the Great Replacement theory, this idea that globalists, particularly Jews, are trying to destroy America by bringing in people who aren't white. On the left, it's Big Bad Israel. Statistically, the Republican Party in Washington has been overtaken by people who support its big lie. The Democratic Party has not. The media, however, has been overtaken by the big lie of the left. So, what can we do to get it to focus on the right things this October 7th? Well, as you might know, I often put text into my newsletter that you can send to the heads of any news agencies, calling them out and demanding better. I offer that for all kinds of different topics. Well, for this, I'm writing an open letter to the media, calling on them to do the right thing, explaining it in journalistic terms, the language that news people use. And if you want to know how you can be one of the people who sends me stuff you want me to talk about on this show or fact check, well, there are two ways. One, paid subscribers to the newsletter have direct access to me through a messaging system there. Also, you can post in comments, and we do see those. Everyone else, there is a form at my website. If you just go to my website, joshlevs.com, JOSHLEVS.com, you will see a form that you can fill out, and that takes you through this little process of confirming your email. Both of these systems are designed so that you can submit questions, comments, without having to worry that random haters on the internet will come after you. Announcement: I have events coming up. As much as I love doing this podcast and connecting with listeners like you online, I also love the chance to get on the road and meet you in person. I do talks and conversations at conferences, events, summits, businesses, all kinds of organizations. I focus on fact-checking, busting myths, problems with the media, and other stuff too, like how to build your own career, as I've always done. That's actually what I talked about in my first TEDx talk. Anyway, a couple of events to tell you about now. On October 7th, I will be delivering a keynote address at a commemoration ceremony in Columbia, South Carolina. It's called Resilience and Unity. People of all backgrounds, faiths, etc. are welcome. Everyone committed to memorializing what happened 1 year ago. By the way, Columbia is also home to the North American partner of the Anne Frank House. Before that, coming up this weekend, I will be emceeing an event for the Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce in the Southeast. It supports and promotes Asian American businesses in the region. If a business or organization you're a part of anywhere in the world is interested, get in touch. I do events everywhere. You can get information and contact me at my website, joshlevs.com. You'll find a link there that says bookings, and that takes you to a form you can fill out. Oh, and also, as I mentioned last week, I'm now also doing events with a pivotal figure in U.S. history that no one knew about, George E. Hawker Jr., America's first Black spy master. His story was always secret. Now we can share it on the road. For information on all this, just get in touch. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week. Wait, before you go, one quick thing that only takes like 10 seconds. Give this show a great rating on whatever podcast player you use. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Pocket Casts, and others. Every time someone gives They Stand Corrected a great rating, an angel gets its wings. Okay, fact check. What actually happens is that the algorithms on these platforms become much more likely to recommend this show to other people, to get people educated about the facts, and to help wake up the media to the important lessons from this show. Click a couple buttons on your phone, give the show 5 stars, and for some apps like Apple Podcasts, give it a great review. Also, makes such a big difference. Thank you so much.